The site for the first Klein family reunion was at the Nemacolin Woods Resort. This beautiful setting happens to be very near the Monongahela River Valley, where the Klein family settled in those small industrial towns of Brownsville, Charleroi, Monessen, and Denora. One of the motivations that I had in trying to organize this reunion is that the history gets lost, and unless it's recorded some way, people just don't remember, and we really would not have the advantage of knowing where our roots were. But while we're still here, we older cousins are going to try to share with you some of the stuff that we remember.
We came a year after David and Jack came over in 1938. And I remember Uncle Jake picking us up in New York and driving us back to Brownsville. And Teddy and I never saw a streetcar, but when we saw one at the bottom of the hill, we tried to push it back up. I remember that. And moreover, I specifically remember that when Donald and Andrew came over this country, who we knew in Europe, we lived in the same town. He smothered us with kisses. In the middle of the night, it seemed to me, with his cold nose. He was very fond of us, particularly, you know, Andy, crazy Ted, about Teddy. And we were the closest. Plus, I knew David and Jack from Europe. But the highlight of our family, I think, circles around Uncle Jake and Aunt Frieda. And a couple of things that I specifically remember. Uncle Jake used to come down the hill in Brownsville. He used to shut the motor off so he wouldn't use so much gas. He would coast down the hill. And as you all may or may not know, all our parents were initially in the beer garden business. Then, we had Brownsville tied up. And I used to help Aunt Frieda go to the liquor store and pick up the heavy stuff so she wouldn't have to, cases of whiskey. And you pulled into a back alley. I'm sure it's still there. But she was blocking the alley and no one could pass through. And while I loaded the car, she's in there inside paying the bill. And this guy's blowing his horn. He wants to get through. So I'm about 11, maybe 12 years old. I get in the car, start it up, and I drive it around. I want to tell you something. When she came out, she went crazy. Somebody stole her car with all the whiskey in it. And this is a true story, so help me. And I finally found her. I said, Aunt Frieda, I got to pull your car around. I want to tell you something. If she was alive, she'd still be chasing me. She was so mad. She was the greatest. I mean, she took care of all of us. And I don't know, as we talk on and on, maybe more things come to our memories. But I remember when Donald took me in Monessen to my first basketball game. I was lousy. I had 2 left feet, I guess. He never took me back. It was my first experience with sports. And not to tie up the whole evening, let me call our eldest statesman as of today.
Well, before that, we're saving him for dessert. Steve wrote me a letter that has a lot of good detail in it. I don't know how he got the information, but
go on, say a few words, Steve.
To share it with us.
Okay. First, I'd like to thank Mr. Hardy for putting up the Klein family tree. Klein family you notice, you think that that's an H, but it's actually, there was a relative apparently that had a learning disability, and there had been thought that there were 2 spellings of Klein. Apparently there are 3, which does begin with an H.
It's a K in Hungarian.
K in Hungarian. Is it not projecting? Okay. Okay, I think one of the ways to remember the relatives is to tell the story. And I don't know if this is true or this is fantasy, but I'll tell you what I've heard about the immigration from Europe. And this is the story really of the movement from a country that no longer exists, Czechoslovakia, to a town that no longer exists, Brownsville. But I'll tell the story or the fantasy. Again, since the principals are no longer here, we can't verify. They might have been able to verify, they might have been able to obfuscate, I'm not sure which they would have done, but in any case, we'll at least share with you what I've heard. And as David began to tell the story, my father was a football star, which everybody has heard, probably ad nauseum. In fact, the scrapbook is now being circulated, and you notice that the pages are quite yellow. This was shortly after the invention of the printing press that the clippings were made. But in any event, I'm going to read you a little bit about this story. So anyway, my dad played for South Union originally, which was apparently right next to here, right next to Farmington. And in those days, as in these days, football players were imported from one town to another. And so Brownsville was attempting to build up a football machine at that time. And so they did import my father to play for Brownsville. The deal was that my grandmother, Frieda, had a grocery store at that time and wanted to move into the liquor business. And Prohibition had just ended a couple years before. And so I think the deal was that if he would come to Brownsville, they would get her a liquor license, which is what happened. So that was part of it. Then in any event, during his career, he did know some judges. I think one judge, his name was Vance Cotton. He was either a federal judge or a local judge, I'm not sure which. And also the mayor of Brownsville at that time was Billy Long. These are famous names that I'm sure ring lots of bells. In any case, as part of the process of the American side of the family helping to bring over the European side, I think there were a couple active players. There were probably those who helped to bankroll some of the actual movement, which I'm sure was my grandmother and Uncle Jake, who I actually never remember but got to know, and then Aunt Rose, whoever else was here at that time. But as David mentioned, there was a need to pull some bureaucratic strings. And so apparently my father and maybe my grandmother interceded through Judge Cotton at that time. It was alleged that they intervened directly with FDR, which I think is probably most unlikely. More likely, they did intervene at some lower level of the federal bureaucracy and did succeed somehow in getting the immigration papers and the permissions. And so that was part of the story of at least the bureaucratic maneuvers that were part of the family coming over. And so that's again, I think, part of the story that my father told a lot and that he was very proud of, and certainly was important in terms of the history, and we know what happened. So that's the main part of the story to share. And that, I think that captures several of the players that my father, my grandmother, and also Uncle Jake and some others as well too. So that's the story.
But I think that it would be a mistake and it would be an omission not to recognize the United States of America, who welcomed us and allowed us to be here and do what we did.